Hey guys, good morning. Purpose of this video is to give you a checklist that you can use if you're the first author. When you're the first author, what I want you to think about is that you're the coach for your co-authors. So you are making the decisions about who does what, obviously in collaboration with your co-authors, right? And you are managing the entire process. You're not expected to write the entire document on your own. You work with your co-authors to get it written. And you assign sections, you assign due dates, etc. And when I say assign, I ask that you do that in a very collaborative way. Please don't just go up to someone and be like, I want this by Friday. Ask them, hey, I'd like to have this by Friday. Is that something you can do? And they may say yes, or they may give you an alternative time. Either way, that's fine. But y'all agree on your deliverables and your timeline so that you can move these things through as efficiently and quickly as possible. Let's review the checklist together, and I'll try to talk it through in a way that hopefully is useful to you. So the first thing I'll say is don't be intimidated by the size of this checklist. It is long, but I made it detailed on purpose so that you can have as much information as possible. So let's go through this slowly together. The first thing, and a mistake that a lot of new authors make, is they want to write a paper in the order in which you read it. That's not what you want to do. You want to start with your results section, and then after your results section is finalized, then you work on your methods and then the intro and discussion, because the results or the introduction is informed by the results, as is the discussion. So you have to have your results first. All right. You'll notice the way this thing is organized is I have a list of tasks, and these tasks are divided into sections based off of the sections needed to get a manuscript written. You have the person responsible, a due date, and any comments that you want to do. This should be a living document that you update weekly with your co-author team so that you're keeping track of where you are with your publication. So the first thing you want to do as the first author is when you have an idea for a paper, you want to fill out the collab data request form on Teams and submit that to our project manager, which right now is Steve Herrera. And you want to make sure that you get faculty approval before you begin. So Steve will meet with the faculty. He'll say, hey, we received this form. The faculty will make any comments on it. And then once it's finalized and approved by the faculty, you're free to start. While you're waiting on that feedback from the faculty, you can and you should identify exemplary articles. If you've never written, for example, a randomized controlled trial paper before, then it would be useful to go look at good examples of RCTs that have been done that are similar to what your question is. How did other people talk about the variables? How did they set up their intro and their discussion? So what can you learn from them? And then also look at the reporting guideline recommendations, which Serena, Dr. Rodriguez, has posted onto Teams for you. So once you have your approval and you have your form, in the form you will have detailed out your outcome explanatory variables and covariates and your research question and study design. So you actually have a lot of information in that form when you fill it out. Now that you have that, you'll have your blank tables created, because you're also going to want to submit your blank tables with that form. And so those blank tables, once they're finalized, you can send those over to the statistician that you've been assigned to work with. The statistician will run the data and they'll fill in your tables for you. Now, we have advised the statisticians to give you the data run that you request, and if they see that there is some way to improve the analysis that perhaps you did not consider, maybe adding or removing some variables, or even just doing a different type of analysis, they are free to do that. They will give you additional tables beyond what you asked for. So you'll get the 2 tables you asked for, and you'll get the additional analytic tables with an explanation about why they did what they did and why they are making that recommendation. If the statistician gives you that recommendation, I urge you to listen to what they are telling you, and consider it, right? Because they are the ones who are actually looking at the data more closely than you are, and they're kind of manipulating the variable. So they probably have a good reason for their suggestion. So you don't always have to take their suggestion. Obviously, you're first author. However, do take their suggestion seriously because they probably have a strong reason for doing it. So you'll work with your statistician to get finalized tables. Once your tables are finalized and you're happy with it, share it with the co-authors, make sure they're happy with it, and get feedback from them on those tables. Once you've gotten feedback from your co-authors and everyone agrees on the data that are being presented, then you want to write up your results section. If you're working with the statistician because you're doing something quantitative, the statistician will write up your results section for you, and they will give you finalized tables in Excel along with the text. I have advised them to essentially write the paragraphs as follows. The first paragraph would be a brief summary of descriptive characteristics of the participants, and then each subsequent paragraph will be one paragraph per table or figure highlighting what is important. It might be that what you get are a series of short paragraphs. After you receive that, if you want to reformat it and clean it up as first author, obviously that is your prerogative. But that's what they are going to give you. So you're going to get clean tables and you're going to get text highlighting the main finding from each table or figure. Once you receive that information in Excel, you will then translate that into a Word document. And that Word document, the figures and the tables will go at the bottom of your Word document below your references. So what you're going to build for us when you are building out a manuscript is one large Word document that begins with the cover letter and goes all the way down to your figures and tables with everything else in between. That one Word document is easier for people to review and give feedback on. And once the document's finalized, then you can split it out into the subsections for journal submission. It's just an easier way to work with material. So we ask that you do it this way because if you give the statisticians a Word table instead of an Excel table, it's harder for them to export data from the statistical software into the tables that you give them. If you give them Excel, it's easier for them to export the data and manipulate it. So have them work in Excel with you, and you, when it's done, move it into Word. So that's your results section. If you go through all those steps, you should have finalized tables and text in a results section text. And that's pretty darn exciting, right? You've done the heavy lifting so far. And now it's just writing up the rest of the material. So your method section is divided into 3 subsections: study design, measures, and data analysis. The statistician will write up the measures section for you because they recoded the variables and they know how they manipulated them, right? And so they'll write up the measures for you. As a reminder, all measures used should be able to be found in the All Measures folder on Teams. So if you are wondering how to set up a variable, go to Teams, go to All Measures, and you should be able to find the seminal article where the tool was reported, and oftentimes a copy of the tool itself with scoring rubrics. So that way you can double check. Always double check that your statistician coded the variables as they should be coded. That's a double check you always want to do. It's 2 eyes making sure that everything was set up correctly. The statistician will draft the text for the measure section, and they will draft the text for the data analysis section. Again, once you receive it, you can edit it however you want, but they will give you text for those 2 sections. You will be responsible for writing the study design section. And when I say you, it could be you or anyone who you delegate that task to. Wherever you see a blank under the person responsible, that is a choice for you to decide if you want to do it or delegate it. So once you get those 3 sections drafted, now you have your method section drafted. The next section I want to talk about is the introduction section. The introduction section is best assigned to someone who has familiarity with the topic, because you want them to go in and do a very efficient literature review. It's easy to get lost in literature. You can spend hours reading articles that really you're not going to include in your publication. And so you want to be strategic. And so what I recommend is early on, meet with your co-authors and come up with an introduction outline. And we'll talk about it in a minute, a discussion outline. And once you have those outlines, you should be able to assign someone to go in and do a very strategic literature review for you and draft an introduction. So for the literature review, my general formula is that your first paragraph is your epi data. Your second paragraph is what is known about the outcomes and any kind of theory that you want to talk about. Sometimes that takes 2 paragraphs, but this is a general guidance. After you talk about your outcomes and or any theory to set up your paper, then you're going to go in and talk about the explanatory variables and the relationship between the explanatory variables and your outcome variable. So you'll notice that the introduction is guided by the variables included in your tables. You don't need to worry about other extraneous things. Now, if there are some very important ideas or concepts that you are not able to put into your tables because maybe we didn't collect that variable, but it's still something important to consider, you might talk about it here because a reviewer is going to bring it up and be like, hey, what about ABC? You'll need to mention that that's an important variable. And then when you get into your methods section, you can add a brief explanation about why it was or was not included, or your limitations in the discussion, whichever place it makes more sense to put it. But generally speaking, your tables guide your intro, the variables in your table. All right, the last paragraph is always your purpose statement. I literally should see the sentence, the purpose of this analysis is bam, 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 right? I want to see that sentence, and then usually that's the last sentence of your introduction, and then you move into the methods section. Notice I said analysis, not study. A study refers to the overall project. So for example, Project Homes is the study. If you are doing a specific paper, you're doing an analysis from the Project Homes data set. So you're always doing the purpose of this analysis is, okay? So you'll do your literature review. My recommendation is to do that literature review, build out a library in either an evidence table or Atlas TI, whichever you and the person doing the review want. However, I do ask that you do build out an Atlas TI library with the literature that you use, so that those PDFs can be imported and shared with other people. If you don't have Atlas TI, at least make sure the person doing the literature review is saving all of the PDFs in a folder, and they can share those PDFs with the co-authors who might want to import them into their Atlas database so that they can read them on their own and code them. If you don't know how to code literature in Atlas TI, we have a video on that we'll post onto the Teams page for you. Shout out to Niles who created that for us. So in addition to creating your evidence table or your Atlas library, you're going to also want to create an EndNote citation library. So you'll put all of your citations in EndNote library, including the PDFs if they're available. That EndNote library will be shared with all of the co-authors and the faculty. So you will make sure that that EndNote library is always shared. And we're going to create a separate video about how to use EndNote and or upload videos that have been created for you to reference. Once you have your literature and it's done in your Atlas or your evidence table so that you know what the literature says about your outcome and explanatory variables, then you want to write up your intro using your outline as a guide. When doing so, you want to use EndNote Cite while you write. That will allow you to build your reference section as you're writing your intro. And if you need to format it for a different journal, it's easy to so do within EndNote. The last section you're going to write is your discussion section. Oftentimes, the first author writes the discussion, but not always. You can decide who does what. Again, how you divide the labor with your co-authors is up to you. But again, you're going to use cite while you write in this section, and you're going to outline it. My general recommendation for outlining the intro is to begin the first paragraph highlighting the main findings and what's important about that finding and how it's relevant to the existing literature discussed in your introduction. Then, for every interesting finding that you want to talk about in your discussion, you're going to write one paragraph. And again, always link that back to the existing literature where it makes sense to so do, including citations. Your next to last paragraph will be your limitations. And then the last paragraph will be a restatement of your primary finding and implications for research policy and practice. And then your very last sentence will be, again, one last restatement, but thinking about it in terms of scientific impact. What is the impact and the punch that you want readers to remember about your paper? That's the last sentence, often the hardest sentence of the entire paper to write. So think deeply about how you're going to get that punch and end with that at the end. One note on writing the discussion, and this is stylistic. The traditional way to talk about future research is to save all of those comments to follow the limitations. What I tend to do is to integrate it throughout each paragraph. So for example, if I'm talking about the relationship between social support and substance use, I might talk about the data and what we found about that relationship, how that relates to the literature, and then say, you know, based off of what we have, future researchers may wish to consider, and I kind of fill in the blank there, right? And talk about how our literature might inform next research steps. So you can, that's stylistic where you put that statement. But even if you do that throughout, you still want to have a general implication of your project for research in general, practice, and policy in the next to last paragraph, or last paragraph. After you have this discussion done, you now have a full manuscript. You have your intro, you have your methods, you have your results, and you have your discussion. The heavy lifting is almost done. Now what you want to do is draft an abstract. And the abstract, we do have guidance for what should go into an abstract. Typical abstracts are about 250 words. Typically, you're going to have the same headings that you would have in your manuscript. So you're going to have intro, methods, results, discussion. And we have guidance on Teams, again, for how to format that and a recommendation for how many sentences to allocate to each. Go to Teams and get that information. You'll draft your abstract, and then you're going to identify 5 keywords. These 5 keywords are words that are common and get a lot of hits in PubMed, but are different from your title. You always want to use words different in your title because the search engines are already going to hit on the words in your title. So use the keywords to add additional hits in the search engine. So for example, if your title has medication for an opioid use disorder, your keyword might be medication-assisted therapy. If your title says sexual and gender minority men, then your keyword might be LGBT. If your title says hazardous drinking, then your keyword might be alcohol or alcoholism, something like that. You'll go and look at the keywords and see what gets the big hits. Or problematic drinking is another one, right? There's a lot for alcohol misuse. Once you have your abstract and your keywords, you're on the home stretch. Now you want to draft your other submission materials. So now you're going to draft your cover letter, you're going to draft your title and author page, and you're going to select the target journal. Remember, when selecting the target journal, you can take your abstract and you can dump it into Jane and do a Jane search. And so use Jane if you're having a hard time selecting the target journal. Oftentimes in the preliminary, people like to select their target journal. For me, I may have a general idea of the journal, but until I see the full manuscript, it's hard for me to lock into a journal at that point. Instead, I sort of wait until I get a full draft in the abstract and then try to think about where it's going to be the best fit. And so in selecting that journal, I'll use Jane to guide myself. I'll also use the impact score to figure out how prestigious the journal is. And if my results are really innovative and interesting, I'm going to go for the highest impact journal first, work myself down. If the results are, you know, publishable, but not the most amazing results in the world, then I might not go to the highest impact journal. I might start, you know, a step or two down and then work my way down. But you always still want to shoot high, right? And then work your way through it based off of doing a quick search for your target journal to see if similar papers to yours have been published or not in that journal. Broadly speaking, just to kind of give you a framework, if you are doing a quantitative paper, a good goal for the number of words in your intro through your discussion, including your headings, is 3,500 words. For a qualitative paper, you'll see journals take up to about 5,000 words, but most quant journals take about 3,500. Some will be 3,000, but 3,500 is a good safe bet when you're drafting a journal article. Once you have everything from your cover page all the way down to your tables and figures with your references and all the other details in between, you're going to edit the full manuscript for grammar, spelling, and concision. You're going to integrate feedback from all your co-authors, and then you're going to finalize that manuscript. When you finalize it, I'm going to ask you to save two versions. The first version you want to save is in EndNote. The first version you want to save in Word includes your embedded EndNote library. That's useful so that once you get feedback from the reviewers, if you need to add additional citations, you still got a full version that is linked to your EndNote, and you can go in and use that. But you also want to save a second version, and that's the plain text version. So you'll go into EndNote and you'll just reformat your references as plain text, so it just removes all of the linking to EndNote. And that plain text folder file, do a save as of that so you have the whole document saved as plain text, and then save each section that you're going to submit to the target journal. Typically, the sections would include a cover letter, a title and author page, abstract and keywords, the main manuscript with references, and then tables and figures are saved separately. Those are kind of the separate sections, but check your target journal for specific guidance. Once you submit your journal, they will give you a PDF of what you submitted. You will save that PDF, and then along with your PDF and all the other documents, you're going to want to make sure all of the files related to your manuscript, including any do files that you used in Stata to run the code for your paper, all of that information is saved in your manuscript folder on Teams. And that's it, guys. That's the checklist. I realize it is a long checklist. I know it can feel a little intimidating when you first look at it, but I did a detailed checklist to help you think through all the steps. So I hope you find it useful. Don't be intimidated by it. If you have questions, the faculty are here to support you. What I'm doing with this checklist is trying to increase the efficiency of our team so that we start delegating sections and we can burn papers out quicker. That is the intent and that is the hope. If you have questions, do reach out and have a great day.